Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the worn sandals of a Byzantine lighthouse keeper. Picture this. The Aegean Sea stretches endlessly before you, salt clinging to your skin as the last streaks of sunset fade. Above you, the pharaohs of Constantinople, not the Pharos of Alexandria, but its lesser-known cousin, looms like a sleepy giant. Your job? Keep the flame alive. All night. Every night. And no, you can't just nap and hope for the best. If a ship crashes because you dozed off, let's just say Emperor Justinian won't be sending a polite letter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the spiral staircase, each step worn smooth by centuries of keepers before you. The air grows thicker with the scent of burning olive oil, cheap, plentiful, and just smoky enough to make your eyes water if the wind shifts wrong. At the top, the bronze reflector gleams faintly in the dusk, waiting for your first shift. Mainstream fact? Byzantine lighthouses weren't just for navigation. They were symbols of imperial power, a way to say, yes, we rule even the waves. Quirky tidbit. Some keepers swore the mirrors were polished so well they could spot a sailor's bad haircut from 3 miles out. Historians still argue whether the flame was kept alive continuously or only lit when ships were expected. Personally, I'd vote for the latter. Imagine the overtime pay. The first hint of morning isn't the sun, it's the gulls. Their screeches pierce the quiet like a badly tuned lyre, and you groan, rolling off your thin straw mattress. Dawn means one thing: mirror duty. The bronze reflector that magnifies your flame won't polish itself, and if the harbour master spots even a fingerprint smudge, you'll be scrubbing chamber pots for a week. You grab your rag, stiff with yesterday's wax, and start circling the reflector, your breath fogging the metal until you wipe it clear. The Byzantines didn't invent mirrors, but they did perfect the art of making sailors squint from miles away. As you work, you notice the grooves where previous keepers carved their names, some with dates, others with crude drawings of ships, or possibly very ambitious fish. Mainstream fact. Byzantine metallurgists mixed arsenic into bronze to prevent tarnishing, a trick they probably regretted the first time a keeper licked their fingers after polishing. Quirky tidbit. One 10th century manual suggests whispering prayers to St. Nicholas while cleaning, lest the mirror grow dull with spite. Historians still argue whether keepers actually had to recite hymns during maintenance, or if that was just a cruel rumour spread by bored monks. You sigh as you lug another amphora of olive oil up the stairs, your 5th this week. The stuff smells like a frying pan that's seen too many Lenten fasts, but it burns clean and steady, which is more than you can say for the fish oil some northern lighthouses use. Pro tip: never volunteer for Baltic lighthouse duty unless you enjoy the aroma of rancid herring at 3 a.m. The real challenge isn't the burning, it's the measuring. Too much oil, and you're wasting imperial resources. Too little, and the flame sputters out right as some spice merchant's ship rounds the cape. You've developed an eye for the perfect pour, watching the golden stream glug into the reservoir with practiced precision. Mainstream fact? Constantinople's lighthouses consumed over 1,000 litres of olive oil annually, enough to drown a small donkey, not that anyone tried. Quirky tidbit? Some keepers swore adding a splash of wine made the flame burn bluer, and made their shifts more bearable. Historians still argue whether the famous eternal flame of the Pharos was actually maintained through clever shifts or just Byzantine bureaucratic exaggeration. The worst part isn't the cold or the smell of oil. It's the silence. Hours stretch like taffy between ship sightings, leaving you alone with the crackle of flame and your own increasingly questionable thoughts. You've started naming the spiders in the rafters, that one's definitely a Theodora, and holding full debates with the seagulls about tax reform. Last week, you caught yourself applauding a particularly dramatic wave. To stay sane, you've developed rituals. At moonrise, you recite Homer, badly. At midnight, you play knucklebones against yourself. You always let the left hand win. And when the stars are bright, you trace constellations the old keeper taught you, though you're pretty sure Emperor Justinian's chamber pot isn't official astronomy. Mainstream fact? Byzantine isolation was so notorious that some keepers' contracts included mandatory socialization months back in Constantinople. Quirky tidbit? A 9th century medical text warns that lighthouse keepers' urine could predict storms, though the method was suspiciously similar to regular drunkenness detection. Historians still argue whether the famous lighthouse hermit of the Bosphorus was a real keeper or just a metaphor for urban loneliness. Your spine straightens as a shape emerges from the pre-dawn fog. Not the usual fishing boat, but something larger. Is that a Venetian trader, a naval patrol, or just your sleep-deprived eyes playing tricks again? You grab the signal flags, fingers brushing against the worn fabric as you run through identification protocols. The mist makes everything look sinister. That shadow could be sails, or just a particularly ambitious cloud. You squint until your eyes water, trying to spot the telltale flash of oars or the silhouette of lateen sails. Byzantine customs officials pay bonuses for spotting smugglers, but they deduct wages for false alarms. Last month, you woke the harbour master for what turned out to be a very lost flock of cormorants. Never live that down. Mainstream fact? Byzantine naval identification systems were so advanced they inspired early semaphore codes. Quirky tidbit? Some keepers claimed to identify ships by the sound of their oars splashing, a skill that mysteriously vanished after wine rations increased. Historians still argue whether the famous phantom ship sightings were optical illusions, actual invaders, or just keepers hallucinating from olive oil fumes. The first warning isn't the clouds. It's the gulls fleeing inland, their panicked squawks swallowed by the growing wind. By the time the waves start slapping the foundation stones, you're already securing the shutters with hands that know this drill too well. The real challenge isn't the storm itself, though tonight's gales could knock a hippodrome chariot off course, but keeping the flame alive while the tower sways like a drunk senator after symposium night. Rain leaks through cracks you swear weren't there yesterday, hissing as it hits the reflector. You've developed a sixth sense for which floor tiles will stay dry, currently huddled in the southwest corner, where 3 generations of keepers carved protective runes. The thunder sounds suspiciously like Emperor Justinian grumbling about infrastructure budgets. Mainstream fact? Byzantine engineers designed lighthouse foundations with hollow chambers to dissipate wave energy when they bothered to maintain them. Quirky tidbit. An 11th century keeper's diary claims the best storm talisman was a dried squid in the left boot, though he may have just been hungry. Historians still argue whether the legendary unsinkable lighthouse of Thessaloniki was brilliant engineering or just really good propaganda. The imperial courier arrives at the worst possible moment, just as you're picking seaweed out of your beard from last night's storm. He hands you a scroll sealed with enough wax to fuel your lighthouse for a week, mutters something about eyes only, and departs before you can ask whether eyes only includes yours. The parchment smells faintly of lavender and bureaucratic dread. You hold it up to the light, squinting at the suspiciously blank exterior. Is this a promotion? A reprimand for that incident with the Venetian fishing boat? Or just another demand for monthly flame height reports in triplicate? Byzantine administration loves its paperwork more than a cat loves a sunbeam. You tuck it under your mattress to read later, right next to last month's unopened tax assessment. Mainstream fact? The Byzantine postal system could move messages 100 miles per day when bribes didn't slow it down. Quirky tidbit. Some keepers claimed imperial seals could be softened with olive oil for preservation purposes only, naturally. Historians still argue whether those urgent scrolls ever contained anything beyond complaints about lighthouse maintenance budgets. The smell hits you before you even lift the lid. That peculiar aroma of salted fish, lentils, and resignation. Lighthouse cuisine isn't about flavour. It's about calories that won't spoil before the next supply ship arrives, which, judging by last month's 3-day delay that stretched into 2 weeks, could be never. You poke at the hardened bread. It could double as a building material in a pinch. Your one culinary triumph? The fermented barley drink you've been nursing since winter. It might not be proper beer, but after the 3rd sip, you stop caring about proper anything. You've gotten weirdly creative with sea urchins lately. Roasted, raw, mashed into a questionable paste. At this point, you'd trade your left sandal for a single fresh fig. Mainstream fact? Byzantine military rations formed the basis of lighthouse provisions, hence the overwhelming presence of hardtack and disappointment. Quirky tidbit? A 10th century keeper's journal includes a recipe for emergency lamp oil bread, which he admits even seagulls refused. Historians still argue whether that infamous lighthouse cheese mentioned in logs was actual dairy or just mould with delusions of grandeur. The real keeper of this lighthouse isn't you. It's her. That one-eared tabby currently judging your oil-pouring technique from her throne, a broken amphora. You've named her Empress Theodora II, partly as a joke, mostly because she's clearly plotting to overthrow you. She's not alone in her reign. The seagulls hold daily council on the western ledge. The rats hold midnight feasts in the grain stores, what little remains. And that one stubborn octopus keeps infiltrating the tide pool beneath the tower like a soggy, 8-legged spy. You've developed an understanding with these creatures. The gulls get your fish heads when you're feeling generous. Theodora gets first pick of the rats, a win-win. And the octopus gets left alone because, frankly, you respect its hustle. Last full moon, you caught yourself narrating your duties to an audience of barnacles. They were terrible conversationalists, but excellent listeners. Mainstream fact? Byzantine ships often carried cats as official rodent control, a tradition lighthouse keepers enthusiastically adopted. Quirky tidbit? A 12th century bestiary claims some lighthouse cats could predict storms by the direction they licked their paws, though the same text insists hedgehogs make excellent bakers, so take that with a grain of salt. Historians still argue whether the famous lighthouse raven of Constantinople was an actual bird or just a metaphor for imperial spies. The stack of parchment on your desk mocks you. Wave height reports, oil consumption logs, inventory lists for inventory lists. You've spent 3 days trying to decipher whether one amphora, partial, means half empty or half full. Philosophy was simpler back in Athens. The quill in your hand has developed a permanent dent from how hard you've been gripping it. This is the real test of a lighthouse keeper, not braving storms or deciphering ship signals, but surviving the Byzantine Empire's love affair with paperwork. You've started dreaming in triplicate. That wax seal you're supposed to apply? It's probably worth more than your monthly wages. And don't get you started on the optional supplemental forms that somehow become mandatory the moment you ignore them. Mainstream fact: The Byzantine bureaucracy was so elaborate it had officials whose sole job was to supervise other officials supervising paperwork. Quirky tidbit? Archaeologists found a 9th century lighthouse log that included a doodle of the harbour master as a donkey, complete with an accidental wax spill over his face. Historians still argue whether all this documentation ever actually got read, or if it just went straight to some basement in Constantinople to moulder for eternity. The stack of parchment on your desk mocks you. Wave height reports, oil consumption logs, inventory lists for inventory lists. You've spent 3 days trying to decipher whether 1 amphora partial means half empty or half full. Philosophy was simpler back in Athens. The quill in your hand has developed a permanent dent from how hard you've been gripping it. This is the real test of a lighthouse keeper, not braving storms or deciphering ship signals, but surviving the Byzantine Empire's love affair with paperwork. You've started dreaming in triplicate. That wax seal you're supposed to apply? It's probably worth more than your monthly wages. And don't get you started on the optional supplemental forms that somehow become mandatory the moment you ignore them. Mainstream fact: the Byzantine bureaucracy was so elaborate it had officials whose sole job was to supervise other officials supervising paperwork. Quirky tidbit? Archaeologists found a 9th century lighthouse log that included a doodle of the harbour master as a donkey, complete with an accidental wax spill over his face. Historians still argue whether all this documentation ever actually got read, or if it just went straight to some basement in Constantinople to moulder for eternity. The oil amphorae are lighter than they should be. You check the seals again. Definitely broken, but not by rats, unless they've developed opposable thumbs and a taste for premium olive oil. Someone's been stealing from your stores, and the list of suspects is short. That shady fisherman who keeps accidentally drifting too close to shore, the new tax collector who smells suspiciously of lamp fuel, or, and this would hurt most, one of your fellow keepers. You start leaving decoy amphorae filled with fish brine, just waiting for the thief to get a nasty surprise. The manual says to report this to the harbour master immediately. But where's the fun in that? This is the most excitement you've had since that time a confused pelican tried to nest in your hair. You take first watch, huddled near the storage nook with a net, and the grim satisfaction of someone about to catch a bureaucrat red-handed. Mainstream fact? Byzantine law prescribed nose amputation for lighthouse tampering, a deterrent that apparently didn't account for desperate fishermen. Quirky tidbit? A recovered ship's log mentions a keeper who deliberately dimmed his light to extort guidance fees from merchants. His career ended abruptly and vertically from a high cliff. Historians still argue whether most lighthouse thefts were actual crimes or just keepers covering up their own oil-bartering side hustles. You spit 3 times over your left shoulder before ascending the stairs tonight. Not because you're particularly superstitious, but because the last keeper who skipped this ritual supposedly got haunted by the ghost of a dysentery-stricken sailor for a full lunar cycle. Lighthouse life breeds strange habits. Never start a sentence with the word storm. Always step onto the platform with your right foot first, and absolutely never acknowledge the strange knocking sounds from the empty storage room. Everyone knows it's just the wind. Probably. Your newest ritual involves whispering the names of all 12 apostles when trimming the wick. Not for divine protection, but because it's exactly long enough to keep you from rushing and burning your fingers again. The previous keeper left behind a collection of lucky chicken bones arranged in cryptic patterns near the flame. You haven't touched them, but you haven't thrown them out either. Better safe than cursed. Mainstream fact? Byzantine sailors and keepers shared many superstitions. creating a peculiar maritime folklore hybrid. Quirky tidbit? A 10th century text claims some keepers wore socks inside out during storms to confuse the wind demons. Historians still argue whether these superstitions functioned as practical psychology or accidentally created placebo effects that actually improved lighthouse operations. The new keeper arrives on a suspiciously calm morning, the sea like polished glass, as if the Bosphorus itself is holding its breath. He's younger than you expected, with that eager look you remember wearing 3 years ago, before the solitude sanded down your edges. As you walk him through the routines, this mirror needs extra wax on Tuesdays, that stare creaks like a dying seagull, you realize you're not just explaining a job, you're passing along a peculiar way of life. He nods too quickly at your warnings about the northwest shutter's loose hinge and the seagull that pecks ankles. You don't mention the way loneliness can shapeshift in the long hours before dawn, or how you've come to recognize individual waves by sound. Those are lessons he'll learn soon enough. When you hand over the keys, one for the oil store, one for the records chest, one that doesn't seem to fit anything but came with the job, it feels lighter than it should. Mainstream fact? Byzantine lighthouse keepers typically served 3 to 5 year terms, long enough to gain expertise, not so long they forgot how to speak to other humans. Quirky tidbit? A recently discovered keeper's diary includes detailed instructions for training your replacement to hear phantom ship bells as a prank. Historians still argue whether the empire's high keeper turnover resulted from isolation, poor pay, or simply too many officials discovering they hated seagulls. Years later, you return as a visitor. Your back a little stiffer from age, your hands no longer automatically reaching for the oil jug at sunset. The lighthouse smells exactly as you remember: salt, metal, and that faint undercurrent of charred optimism. The new keeper eyes you warily until you mention the loose floorboard near the west window, where generations have hidden their best wine. Then, with the conspiratorial grin of someone who's learned to make peace with solitude, he pours you a cup. You watch him work, polishing mirrors, adjusting flames, and realize the rhythms haven't changed. The sea still whispers the same complaints, the gulls still steal with the same shamelessness, and the night shift still feels like holding vigil over a sliver of civilization. When he offers to let you light the evening beacon for old time's sake, your hands remember what your mind had almost forgotten: the exact angle to hold the torch, the way to cup your palm against the wind. The flame catches on the first try, because some things, it seems, stay with you. The fire flickers contentedly now, its glow softening the tower's rough edges into something almost gentle. Outside, the waves rock against the stones in that ancient, unhurried rhythm that cared nothing for empires rising or falling. You breathe deep, salt, oil, the faintest hint of tomorrow's rain, and let the memories settle where they belong. However far you've travelled from this place, however many years have stacked themselves between then and now, there remains this quiet truth: the light never really leaves you. It lingers in the way you still wake at odd hours, attuned to some silent signal, in how storms make your hands twitch toward phantom oil jars, in the unreasonable satisfaction you take in well-polished bronze. The new keeper nods from his post, already half lost in his own vigil. You don't say goodbye. Lighthouse people never do. Just one last look at the flame you tended for so many years, now passing its warmth to another pair of watchful hands. The stairs feel softer underfoot as you descend, the night air cool against your face. Somewhere beyond the harbour, a ship's lantern winks back at the shore, safely guided home once more.